Hey, welcome everybody to Spirituality Adventures. We're glad you're tuning into this episode. We are a viewer and listener supported podcast, so we really appreciate you listening, watching on YouTube. We really encourage you to subscribe to whatever platform you're using. If you're on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, or if you're on Apple or however you listen to a podcast, be sure and subscribe. We greatly appreciate it. Also, make comments if you like it and share it if you like it. We really need people to make comments and share the episodes that you like. And then also, if you're not already a supporter, we really would encourage you to go to spiritualityadventures.com and you can pick a tier, and we have bonus content for every type of giver. This is a nonprofit, so they're tax-deductible donations, but we do provide bonus content for those who are supporters. So be a part of the team, help support Spirituality Adventures, and we're so glad you're tuning into this episode. Folks, welcome to Spirituality Adventures. Thanks for tuning into this episode. I've been trying to get Pete on here for probably for a year, and so we finally made it happen because I usually do Tuesdays, and he can't do Tuesdays. So Pete Enns is professor.
I'm also out on parole, so that makes a big difference.
So that
was the problem, right?
Right.
For my theological views.
You're hanging out with people that I hang out with if you're on parole, then. Definitely. He's a professor of biblical studies at Eastern University, which I'm guessing you teach mostly Old Testament. Is that right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, you can't stay in one testament ever, really. But yeah, basically Hebrew Bible and basic issues of interpretation. But yeah.
Yeah. And did his PhD at Harvard University. And his newest book that came out last year is called Curveball. And I want to recommend it to everybody because I thoroughly enjoyed reading this. Pete and I are basically the same age, and he's 2 months older than me. And we have, some of our journeys crisscross. And so I hope that kind of comes out here as well. But Pete, I just let you know, I always loved studying. So after I did my master's of divinity, I did a doctor of ministry at Fuller. And then after I did that, I was working on a PhD in the Old Testament at Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, and was down to my dissertation when I went to rehab. Back up since then. That was 5 years ago.
Right.
I was studying with, the reason why I ended up going to Midwestern was because they had two professors there that had done their PhDs at HUC in Cincinnati, Hebrew Union.
Sure. Yeah.
Which is where, Hanan Brichto, I'm thinking of William Hallow. I know John Walton did his PhD at HUC in Cincinnati.
Yeah, that's a good place. I mean, it's many Christians I know have gone there to do their PhD.
Yeah. So I had two guys who had graduated from there who were brilliant in Hebrew that were 15 minutes from my house. And so I thought, well, heck, I'm going to study with these guys. And so, I thoroughly enjoyed it. But it exposed me to all kinds of stuff that when I went through my darkest days feeling like an atheist, 2019, it gave me plenty of fuel to rethink God, to rethink all kinds of stuff, right? And you've done a great job. So, folks, I want to highly recommend Curveball to all of you who, I still have a lot of evangelicals who listen to me, Pete. So I'd really encourage folks to read Curveball if you're from an evangelical background, or if you're from any kind of background that really valued believing right doctrines and the Bible had all the answers, and then how that lines up with life and brings curveballs into our life and changes thinking and changes our theology and changes our views of God and changes how we relate to the Bible. All of that stuff is in this book, and it's great. It's a great read. I thoroughly enjoyed it. So let's get a little of your story first. Where were you born? Where did you grow up? And tell us your religious background.
I was born in New Jersey, in the northern part of the state. My parents were immigrants. Long story short, they settled there, met on the boat, got married, and settled in northern New Jersey, as many immigrants did. And I, was raised in a home that believed in God and was I'd heard about Jesus and things like that, but it was never any formal education in Christianity. So I didn't have, they weren't fundamentalists because they were Germans. There's European Christianity is not like here. So I grew up without some of the baggage I think that many people have had to struggle with, and I'm aware of that. It's easier for me to get over some things than others who were raised in a certain way. But they did send my sister and I have one sibling to a Lutheran confirmation class, which was 2 years. Every Wednesday after school, we would go and learn about the Lutheran faith. And the one thing that came out of that is I memorized creeds, and I still have them, in my head. And it was a nice formative experience in retrospect. I didn't like it then. What seventh grader likes to go to these things? But it was a formative experience for me, and in a liturgical environment, because they're Lutheran. So yeah, and that's the long and short of it. And I had a conversion experience in high school in a Nazarene church, which is a long story. I had then sort of a movement towards Calvinism in my early 20s because of a church we were attending, which was a really good church. And I learned a lot there, and that sent me to seminary a few years later. And while I was there, it didn't take me long to realize that I sort of liked studying this stuff, and knew that I'd want to go to graduate school one day. And it wound up being Old Testament because, as one of my professors told me, Pete, think about it. There was like 4 times as much material and there are fewer scholars. So you might want to just focus on the Old Testament, which is, partly the story, but it's also, that's the part I wanted to wrap my head around it. And just, how does it work? How is this relevant for today? How is it this dark, almost mysterious part of the Bible for many people? You read the Psalms and things like that, but who really reads the prophets or Leviticus? And I wanted to understand what's really the substructure of the Jesus movement in the first century. That's really what I wanted. I wanted to understand it. And that was really a thing. I was really driven internally to try to understand what I said I believed.
Yeah. Good stuff. Where did you go to college?
I went to Messiah College, which is in central Pennsylvania, near the capital of Harrisburg.
And then you played baseball there, right? I
played baseball there, right?
On scholarship? Is that a NAI or Division III?
No, that's Division III. There are no scholarships for sports in Division III.
Okay.
So I went there. I pitched for the 3 years that I was there. I went to Rutgers University my first year, which is the State University of New Jersey, and it's too big. Didn't like it. Went to Messiah. So.
And then where'd you do seminary?
At Westminster Theological Seminary, which is outside of Philadelphia.
Yeah.
And I was a student there, and I actually taught there for 14 years after I got out of Harvard.
Okay. And then you went to Harvard. Who did you? I know Waltke did his. He did his stuff at Harvard.
He did his PhD there, right? Yeah.
Yeah, because I had to do a paper on the Samaritan Pentateuch, and
that's his thing. Right?
I found his dissertation, right? So
yeah, right.
But there's some other great professors there at Harvard too, especially in the Old Testament. I'm trying to pull. Did Kaiser end up there? And I'm trying.
Walter Kaiser. I don't remember. I know that. The teachers I had there were amazing.
Who did you do?
A lot of people have gone there, but.
Who did you do your dissertation with?
James Kugel.
Okay.
My 2 big influences there were both Jewish professors, James Kugel and John Levinson. And there are others, Peter Machinus, Paul Hansen, a few others that I had classes with that I liked a lot. But they were the most, because they're the ones who got me thinking hermeneutically and theologically without even using the words.
Right. I really liked Levinson's stuff, He's
amazing.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, cool. So then curveballs. So you at least had enough footing in the confessional church to have some fairly rigid beliefs that would kind of be like growing up evangelical a little bit, wouldn't you say? Especially with your conversion in the Nazarene world.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that happened when I was like 16. And so I wasn't really thinking theologically, but what happened to me there was I started having questions. And it wasn't the kind of place that really even thought about, what do you mean questions? Questions about what? How can you possibly have questions? It's so obvious. So, but I didn't feel restricted by them, and I just didn't stay there. I was there for a few years, but then I left, and the Calvinist world that I went was a part of. What I liked about it so much was that there were certain questions being asked, and there was doing deep dives into books of the Bible or into things like that. And of course, as time goes on, you realize that, well, it had its own kind of a narrowness attached to it. And I just began reading things on my own, and it made me realize there's a big world out there of how people think about this stuff. And it was very intriguing to me. Rarely was it really a threat to me. I mean, some things are like, oof, gosh, I'm not ready for this. But for the most part, it just expanded my thinking, and it made a lot of sense. And to me, I'm just interested in truth. And I know that sounds really mamby-pamby, but that is the case. I want to know what's true. And even if I can't tell you, I think this is true, I'm at least trying to pursue it and trying to understand truth. And that really drives everything that I do. And that's why I don't always have patience internally with what I perceive to be simplistic answers to difficult issues.
Yeah. I don't know. So I was rooted very strongly in the evangelical world, but yet studying with, super liberal scholars and, reading everything. And I loved reading everything, but then I always tried to think it back into sort of my more evangelical centered worldview, right? So I always believed in evolution. I always tried to, massage that back into a fairly conservative kind of view about Jesus and the Bible, I would say. Like my favorite guy of late would have been N.T. Wright, like that kind of, I would say he's on the more progressive side of whatever.
Yeah, for a lot of, being a British evangelical, he's very different than an American evangelical, and he has latitudes that, Michael Bird is another one, a New Testament scholar who does some writing with Tom. They have more latitude, much more latitude than American evangelicals. I still think there's a ceiling there that you hit too quickly. But that's my opinion. That's not a judgment. It's just my opinion. I think, if you take that line of thinking further, you're going to break through that glass ceiling and you're going to see things differently. And, but anyway.
When I was doing my PhD or working on my PhD at Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, so, like a conservative Southern Baptist seminary, they called me a British evangelical is what they called me.
Oh, that's nice. I guess.
That's before and that's before I went through what I went through the last 4 or 5 years, right? Now they just would like.
Were they trying to be nice to you or trying to be mean to you when they said that?
Nice. I think nice.
That's nice.
But some probably maybe not, so.
That's probably as absolutely liberal as you could get.
Yeah.
To be called a British evangelical. That's barely inside the camp.
That's what they called me. So, but even some of that blew apart on me in the last 4 years, right? So,
sure.
But at any rate, so this curveball analogy, I want to just stick with that through the rest of the interview because you weren't always trying to bring all of your knowledge back into a more conservative framework. It doesn't sound like you allowed it to push you. You allowed all these curveballs to push you further into discovery of truth versus some box that you needed to fit everything into. Is that true?
I'd like to think that's true, but I don't think that it is. I think the thinking that you read in Curveball is not where I was, say, 40 years ago or even 30 years ago. And, when I was especially teaching at Westminster Seminary, which is a conservative Calvinist institution, which was inerrantist, but they allowed you to think about what that meant. But they weren't literalists inerrantists, but a different kind of inerrantist. But, after being in in a large secular research institution and then going back to teach there, I had a whole different framework for thinking about why the Bible looks the way that it does. And so I would, for my students' sake, and I was thinking this way myself because I couldn't even allow myself to get in touch with what's deep down because it's too threatening. You could lose your job, right?
Yeah.
And I wasn't being duplicitous. That's just a psychological and sociological mechanism that happens to people in that situation. But I would say things like, the Bible's inerrant, but whatever is in there is fine because that's what God wants, including things like historical contradictions, including things like moral problems with God's own actions in the Bible, right? And well, God wants that there to push us to think, which is actually a very ancient Christian and Jewish view. These things are there and they're so ridiculous. They're meant to incite you to probe deeper and see meaning that's beneath the surface. That's sort of where I was with some of those things. But I mean, the truth is, I just in retrospect, I know what I was doing there, but since having left there now about 14 years ago, I just a whole other sector of my brain started working, and I don't find those explanations to be pushing me towards truth. I found that pushing me towards maintaining a system of thought that that I think could be critiqued pretty easily, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah. Did you have a shame factor to, some of that deconstruction where, like for me, I'd taught people for so many years, led people to Christ and taught them about God and how to hang on to God even through suffering, right? And yet when I went through my deepest, darkest thing in 2019, I didn't feel like I could hold on to. I had to let it all go for a season, and then I felt shame about like letting go of, like, just re-examining everything. I felt even shame about that process sometimes. You know what I mean? Because I'd been a leader in,
Right.
people come to Christ, and then all of a sudden myself, I didn't feel like I could hold all the pieces together. Did you have any kind of shame attached to that evolving of your thinking and theological beliefs about God?
That's a really good question. As you're asking it, I'm thinking to myself, I've never really asked myself that question. And I imagine there are probably, I've had in my mind, for example, thoughts like, I'm thinking the very thing that they warned me about thinking years ago. If you do that, you're going down the slippery slope. I'm like, well, whatever slope I'm on, this makes perfect sense to me, So there's a little bit of like people from my past sort of calling me out on things that we knew this was going to happen to you, right? And there's a little bit of shame in that, but it's not the kind of shame I think that you're talking about. Yours is a different kind of shame. And for me, when I was questioning everything like you were, I had that same, what I call my season of atheism, and it was legitimate. It wasn't like, a phase I went through and now I can say I defeated atheism or some such nonsense like that. It's just nothing made sense to me. And I didn't feel shame. I felt weary and I felt sad, actually. That's what I felt. And then things just started, long story short, things started building in a different way than I had ever conceived of, and influences I never would have thought would be influences that led to a real reconstruction of things that's much more open and much more expansive and not evangelical. I have to say I don't see myself theologically as an evangelical, even though, I have truly many evangelical friends. And I'm not just saying that. I do, and we get along great. I just don't see myself as fitting there.
Yeah. When in the Curveball book, you mentioned a time when you were sitting in your basement for 3.5 years trying to piece together a living kind of by yourself.
Yeah.
Was that kind of your dark night of the soul, that 3 years in the basement? And was that were you, I'm curious, I don't know how much personal information you want to, because you didn't go into much in the book. I was wondering, were you married? Did you get divorced?
No, we're married. Yeah. No, my kids at that point when this started, this was in 2008.
Okay.
And I started teaching at Eastern University in January of 12.
Okay.
So it was basically 3.5 years of cobbling together a living. That's the period. If some of your listeners know the story, I worked with the BioLogos Foundation, which is a science faith kind of think tank.
I'm a big.
I did that for about a year and a half. Yeah. So I did that stuff. I adjuncted whatever. But yeah, that was a difficult period. That's when I was really alone with my thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember and my kids were older, they're essentially out of the house at that point, except for one. And I just remember once just lying on a sofa. I'm not sure if I even said this in Curveball, but lying on a sofa in my study in the basement, which has no natural light, which doesn't help, by the way. You need natural light not to go off your rocker. But I'm lying there and I'm thinking to myself, just getting very sad and melancholy that I'll never celebrate Christmas again. I'll never sing a Christmas carol. I'll never do those things I've been doing most of my life, and needing to let go of all that. And that was sort of frightening, but also just very sad for me, and I didn't know what I was believing or thinking, because when, this is the issue with people who leave some form of a conservative iteration of Christianity, call it evangelical, call it neo-Calvinist, call it fundamentalist, whatever you want to call it.
Conservative.
The thing is, at least they give you a structure.
Yeah.
That you're supposed to sign off on. As long as you sign off on it and not interrogate it,
mm-hmm.
everything makes sense.
Right.
It all falls into place, and you've got a social structure to support you. Yeah. When you say, and again, I think I did mention this in the book, but when you say, I don't want people telling me what to believe, and then it actually happens, it's like it's more than you bargained for. It's like you're on your own at that point, except for some internet friends or things that I read, or people I know from a distance and got to know, who helped me understand Thomas Keating or Richard Rohr, things like that. Then things started falling into place a little bit differently, right? But that was definitely, that's when I was introduced to the dark night of the soul.
Yeah,
by others. Said, you need to read this and that. I said, okay.
Yeah, interesting. In 2019, when I was at my worst and didn't even want to live really, but a friend of mine mailed me a Richard Rohr book called Falling Upward.
Yeah.
I wasn't even reading. I wasn't doing any, I was just trying to survive. And
right. Mm-hmm.
I read it and loved it. And then, I have friends that know Richard. So then I started hubbing around the Richard crowd. That got me to Brian McLaren. Brian got me to the Wild Goose Festival a couple of years ago, and then, and that's been expanded. And I actually saw you. I was sitting in the crowd, not last summer, the summer before last.
Yes, 2 summers ago. Right. Yeah.
And I was sitting there listening to Pete, and I was like, God, I got to get this guy on my podcast. So
here we are. Here we are.
So curveball history is one of the big ones. The way the Bible talks about history, versus the archaeological evidence of, like you brought out, I remember studying my PhD, and I was like, the first time I thought, I always thought that the first the first 11 chapters of Genesis were basically sort of, mythological truth, trying to describe things that are not history, but prehistory stuff. But then I thought, once you hit Genesis 11, you kind of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, you kind of get into some real history. But as you unpack all of that from archaeological and other resources outside the Bible, all of a sudden you're like, is all of this fictional history, kind of stuff.
Right. Yeah.
And then you get into the science side of the Bible. And so two of the big curveballs when we're reading the Bible and trying to make sense of it in today's world is its treatment of history and its treatment of science. Talk about those two curveballs, which is your book, by the way. So I know those are
pretty much, yeah,
questions.
Well, I would say, I would put it a little bit differently. I would say that the Bible doesn't treat history or science, because history, as we think of history, was not the way they thought of it, right? So I don't want to. I know what you're saying. The question is fine, but I want to nuance it a little bit.
Yeah, change the question for me.
I don't want people to think that, well, our knowledge of what history even is. Of course, everyone's always thought that. The biblical writers clearly did not think of history the way we do because of how they wrote it and how it's perfectly fine to have contradictory historical statements living next to each other. I mean, sometimes literally living next to each other in some passages in the Bible. And so their view of history is different. So I would say that I was learning to understand what they were doing when they wrote about David or the exile or Moses or anything else. And science, in a strict sense of the word, didn't exist in antiquity, at least not in this part of the world. Maybe the Greeks, a few hundred years later, but it's a different world, and they have explanations for physical reality that are rightly mythical or folkloristic, and not what we would call scientific. So I don't feel the need to cram the Big Bang into Genesis chapter 1. Right. I don't need to find a way to reconcile the Adam and Eve story with evolution, because I really think they're speaking a different language entirely. And so I read Genesis 1 and 2 and 3 and all of the rest of the primordial history, as it's often called, as ancient Israelites navigating their own existence as people who have this God that they called Yahweh, and how they describe that in their context, because all of those stories have an ancient context, and they're saying something that distances them from others around them. I'd say primarily the Canaanites and the Babylonians. Those are probably the two big ones. And so that's how I look at this stuff. I try to suspend, and I think I can suspend my own notions of what it would mean to write a book about creation. And it's just not what they were thinking. It's not what they were assuming. So I need to understand as best as I can what they're writing, which is to say, it's all about genre identification. It's like, what is the genre of this material? And say, well, it's history. And I hear people say things like, well, Genesis 1 to 11 has to be historical because the kind of the Hebrew style, the narrative Hebrew style is continued on in the Abraham story and beyond. And we all know that's historical, right? The flip side of that is like, well, no, you're making an assumption there that it's historical in your sense of the word historical. And you're actually making a case that the whole thing is not historical in the sense that we understand it, because the story, the mode of the story, the kind of writing and the Hebrew style, those things are consistent, for the most part, consistent throughout the book of Genesis. And, that sword cuts both ways.
Yeah, I've directed a lot of people to John Walton's stuff on just trying to get into the ancient cosmology and the mindset. I don't know if that's if you.
Well, I think John is brilliant. I like John a lot, but the problem I have with John and with other people I would call very learned people, but still evangelicals anyway. There are friends of mine. Trevor Longman, for example, is a friend of mine. Yeah. We talk about this stuff.
Right.
I think that, like, John is so good at explaining the ancient Near Eastern context. He's so good. He's pedagogically very, very good. But he hits a ceiling very quickly and won't go beyond it even though I think the argument that he's amassed demands that you take that next step and go a little bit further.
Yeah,
right.
I'm with you.
For example, his Lost World books,
Yeah.
which are nice books. For me, and I mean this as a compliment, John's books for me are like gateway drugs for people who are coming out of a literalist, fundamentalist way of thinking. Well, there's a context here, right? I think what John does is like the beginning of a much bigger process, which is really rethinking what the Bible even is and what it's there to do, right? And so when you get to talking about the Adam and Eve story, for example, and John has these propositions, he has his in these books, he divides it into little propositions, and then he'll get to how Adam is, it makes sense in the ancient world, but then you move right to, but he's still historical. Why?
Yeah.
Why is he still historical? What's driving us to say that is not really I think, an analysis of the data. It's more a theological dogmatic necessity to be able to say things like this. So I don't think Adam is in any way, shape, or form a historical figure. I think he's a mythical figure.
I do too.
I think the writer is going to great pains to tell us that by putting a talking snake in there and a tree with magic fruit in it, right? To me, those are genre clues.
Yeah.
And the holding on to the historicity of that in our modern sense is really driven by, I'd say, essentially inerrantist dogmatic concerns.
Mm-hmm.
And once you give that up, you give up everything. Well, maybe yes, maybe no, but that's not the point. The point is you want to be as truthful as possible to this text that you're reading in front of you. And I'm just not sure that an evangelical approach to these chapters brings us towards understanding the chapters. It just gives us a more sophisticated apologetic.
Yeah. It's like, so us modern people who grow up in modernism, assume that the way we view history and science is the way the Bible writers view history and science. And when you dive into the Bible, you're reading a pre-modern book and then knowing why that's important to understand. Even
the thing is, though, these guys I just mentioned, they know that.
I know they know it. Yeah,
they know that very well, but they can't make the connection.
Yeah, but in my old days, if I'd have talked about liberal scholars, I mean, they took modernism and did one thing with it as they looked at it. Well, and then we have our conservative scholars who took modernism and did another thing with it, right?
Exactly right. Yeah.
And neither one of them I haven't found completely satisfying. I like where you're going, because I've rethought the Bible too, especially with all the PhD work I did. And as I studied Midrash and how that functions, all of a sudden this, and you've brought it out well, you brought out the Wesley quadrilateral.
Yeah.
And the experience, tradition, scripture, and how all of that shapes the way we read. And it's a tricycle moving. You use Richard Rohr's analogy there. And how it's like when we talk about what's biblical, I love the fact that you brought out the Israel means wrestling. You brought out the Jacob story. And that's a part of being biblical, is questioning. Doubts, questions, and disbelief are actually a part of the faith journey that are all in the Bible.
Yeah.
And
baked into the Bible like ingredients. You can't get rid of them, and to minimize that stuff, I think, is unfortunate. And to minimize the fact that authors have different views on the very same subject, like, I don't know, the entire history of the monarchy, read Chronicles versus Samuel Kings.
Right.
It's like it's an education into, it realigns the discussion. What is the Bible? What is it there for?
Right.
And it's not the code book that God gave us, and it's pure, and it's written by humans, but they had no influence in it, really. It's just sort of from God's head into our head. And that kind of stuff, actually, at the end of the day, that can breed a lot of crises of faith for people who then take the time to really study this stuff. And you realize, this is complicated. There's a reason why there are seminaries and yeshivas and people keep writing books and thinking about this stuff, because it's not that simple thing that it's sometimes said that it is. It's more complicated, and I think I would expect that of a holy book, to be complicated, to be mysterious, to be something that requires our full adult attention.
Yeah, the only Bible books I read in my darkest moment were Job and the Psalms of Lament.
Yeah.
I liked Job just because he ends in paradox and mystery, and that fit where I was at, So I just started picking and choosing the stuff that I wanted to read when I was.
And isn't it great that there's stuff in there, that is challenges the status quo.
Yeah. So, oh gosh, Pete, I could talk to you all day and we're running out of time, but I want to dive into, so the history part, I want to get one more thought here. As I read like Greek mythology, so if you listen to John Dominic Crossan, he says like the Iliad is the Old Testament for the imperial Roman theology, and Aeneid is the New Testament, right? If you read those, there's some actual history in it, what we would call history in with a modern mind. There's a lot of mythology in it, what we would call in a modern mind, right?
Right.
And then the Bible seems to be almost similar, right? There is some postmodern history sprinkled into the Old and New Testament, that talks about probably actual people that lived,
there's no question it does. Yeah.
There's some actual history contained in the Old Testament, and actual, what we would call postmodern thinking history, in the New Testament as well. I think Jesus actually was a person. I think there are actually apostles. I think there was actually, so, but then it's got all this other stuff thrown in there, the supernatural and things that seem folklore and mythological and ancient thoughts about history and how they viewed the world and all of those cosmological worldviews. And so it's so interesting to try to read through these ancient texts with a modern mind. I can't undo my modern mind. I can recognize modernism and study it and see how it's influenced me. But when I read these texts, it's really fascinating.
Right.
Do you just throw the history part out? Does it matter at all?
But I think it matters because it's part of the story, and the funny thing is that, modernism, for all its faults, one thing that modernism actually really does say and has said is that if you understand these texts, you have to try to go back into the past. You have to try to understand the setting. And once you try to understand the setting, you start asking different questions. You start realizing that the questions you're bringing to the text might not be ones that the author is even interested in dealing with, right? So, but I mean, to your point, well, I think history is important. I mean, important for what? It's just important for understanding the story itself, because I do think there's a historical arc. I think that even with the stories that are either less historically verifiable or completely impossible to verify historically, you still are dealing with a general historical trajectory. I mean, the stories of the patriarchs, the ancestors of Israel, Abraham and Sarah, Isaac, etc., that makes sense in a certain period of ancient Near Eastern history where you had wanderers and you had nomads moving place to place and setting up shop eventually. And the stories of these early ancestors of Israel, they sort of fit that mentality, right? The Exodus story, for which there is no direct evidence outside of the Bible at all, and at best some indirect correlation, perhaps, maybe, depending how you look at it. But even that fits into the late Bronze Age collapse and the early Iron Age resurgence, when you had a vacuum of power, which would be a great time to leave Egypt. When things are a bit more.
There are archaeological evidence of migration patterns of peoples.
Exactly right. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
We have evidence of the increased hill country settlements in the 12th century, and I'm trying 12th and 11th century, which is like the biblical stories, like, well, they settled in the hill country because they could protect themselves there, and those chariots those other people had won't matter in the hill country, right? So there are things that make sense, and the basic thing though that I try to when this comes up and I talk about it with people is the further backwards in time you go from, say, the 9th century, the more difficult it is to talk about history in any way, shape, or form that relates to our views of history.
Right.
Why? Because it's really only in the 9th century that we find true corroborating evidence between certain biblical stories and other nations, like Assyrians, for example, or Moabites, who actually are doing their own writing, having engaged these Israelites with this strange God named Yahweh or something like that. They mention these things in their own text. So at that point, we're dealing with history at a different level than, say, with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. How much of it is history? That's a great question, but you're in more historical ground from the 9th century on. The further back in time you go from the 9th century, the more difficult it is. The period of the judges and the settlement is difficult. The period of the Exodus is more difficult. The period of the patriarchs is 100 times more difficult. And then,
yeah,
I think you're in the world of myth when you get to the opening chapters of Genesis. That's the best way I found to describe those periods.
Yeah, I'm with you. All right. So thank you. So history, let's jump into quantum physics.
Oh, why not?
And
Sure.
God. And
from the sublime to the ridiculous.
All right. And we only have a few minutes left. So, but no, so part of I was never a Calvinist. I always leaned toward, free will defense of evil. And so I was more of an Arminian, but I held on to that sort of Arminian perspective on things, right? And preach that and help people work through suffering with those kinds of ideas. But for me, even that God fell apart for me a little bit after when I went through that. And then so what's crazy is when I was 18 and 19, a freshly, just saved Jesus guy, in the Jesus movement period, going to Baylor, I was reading Hartshorne and Whitehead at Baylor as an 18, 19. Okay. And I remember thinking, this is interesting. It's like God's evolving with everything else. That was literally my 18-year summary of process theology, right?
Right.
And now, all these years later, I'm revisiting that, right? Because of the influence of people like you and Tripp and,
Tripp Fuller, right?
Tripp Fuller and so many process theologians. And this idea of panentheism as it relates to you brought out this whole, I loved the way you gave a layman's understanding of quantum physics and quantum reality, relationality, death and resurrection, relationality as it relates to community, NDEs, near-death experiences, but this vast, vast world that we know from science and from evolution and from cosmology and all that kind of stuff. You bring out all of that, and then we start, well, then how does God fit into all this? And you landed sort of the panentheist, and that's where I'm at now, So now I'm trying to, now here I am 60 something years old trying to restudy, the panentheists of the world, because that's the way I can kind of hang on to God. Otherwise, I don't think there's a God. So
it's hard to talk about God any other way for me. Yeah.
Me too. And so help my audience understand that a little. Like I like to say, deep truth echoes everywhere. And so I think of that in terms of the Bible, in terms of other faith traditions, and in terms of science and evolution and all that kind of stuff. And for me, that boils down to everything's related some way or another, relationality. And death and resurrection is a part of the way evolution works. And community has to fit into that. And if there is a God, has to fit into the reality of all of these things that we find through evolution and cosmology and astronomy and these sciences.
Right.
You've landed in the panentheism camp. What is that? What's the difference between that and pantheism? And you've got 5 minutes to describe.
Okay. Well, I mean, pantheism is the view that God is everything and everything is God. So that tree is God and things like that. And there are pantheists in the world. I'm not a pantheist. A panentheist is that adds these are Greek roots, right? So it adds this en in the middle. Panentheism, en means in. So it means God is in all things, and all things are related to God, and God is related to all things. And related in the sense of God actually being present. And I've been driven to that view because of things like cosmology and quantum physics, as have many other people. This is how process theology got started, to try to take into account Einstein and then the quantum revolution and how we understand the nature of reality. So with a cosmos as big as ours, I asked myself, well, where is God? And you can't really say God's up there because there's no such thing as up, technically speaking. And how far up? And it's a very earth-centered way of thinking anyway, right? It's like very like God's like maybe in the next galaxy. Well, why can't God be at the far reaches of the cosmos? And how does does that even describe, does that make sense to think of God as some place? Maybe God is in every place all the time. Well, Christians think that, God is omnipresent. But this is a deeper level. This is God's energy infuses every single bit of matter. And matter is good. And so God is in relation to the cosmos that God has made through an evolutionary process. And that connects to me to so many things like contemplative prayer, where you're actually looking to clear out some of the muck so you can see God's presence in you. You can call upon God and because you're breathing, you're a human being, you're in God's image, to use the biblical language. It's very practical for me to think of God as being totally always present. And my job is to become aware of that, not to call upon a God who's up there someplace and makes cameo appearances. God is deeply invested in the material universe, right? So that I can't talk about God right now in any other way than in those terms.
Yeah. It's been challenging for me because I cut my teeth on E.M. Bounds and intercessory prayer and, Leonard Ravenhill and revival literature. And, the Vineyard had this strong idea of the kingdom of God breaking through and able to do like supernatural kinds of things.
Right.
I've had to rethink all of that myself. And Tom Ward has helped. I've become friends with him, and I love some of the work that Tom's done along these lines. Well, what can God do if God can't do this, and this because of, all these, the way God interacts with the world, right? He's constantly co-creating with the world, coexisting with the world at every point. Go all the way back to the beginning. You've got some kind of mind matter duality, right? At the beginning of, existing somewhere at the beginning of everything, there's mind and matter. And that mind is, we would call that spirit or God or whatever, right?
Right.
So
a mind that is not connected to material reality. It doesn't need that, to exist. And
it's into deep, deep waters. But I will need to end. But man, I could talk for hours with you about this stuff. But I ran across in the big book of AA. I let you know, I've been working in the recovery world for about 4.5 years. It was fascinating. I landed there when I was questioning everything. And I worked through the first 3 steps, which are God steps. And I didn't even know, I let go of everything. So I'm like, is there even a God? And if there is a God, what is this God like? And can he answer prayer or can he not? And all these kinds of things. And there's this classic Bill Wilson, one of the founders of AA.
Yeah, of course.
He wrestled with this czar in the heaven and a God who controls everything. And he didn't want to believe it. And a friend of his, when he was struggling with the God question, said to Bill, why don't you choose your own conception of God?
Right.
And then Bill's was like, it was only a matter of being willing to believe in a power greater than myself. And that opened the door for him to not be stuck with some view of God that he didn't like. It opened the door for him to explore new concepts of God. And I actually think you've brought out well that the Bible itself allows for that, maybe even encourages that kind of exploration of a concept of God that works with all the truth that we know. And I sense that's what you're trying to come up with, a God of your understanding that fits with all of the knowledge that you've gained to this point in your life.
Yeah, and it's not. I appreciate the way you put that, because sometimes people say, "Oh, Enns, you're just looking for a God that you happen to like." It's not that. I'm literally trying to make sense of reality.
Yeah.
And who of us isn't trying to do that, right? And so for me, it means being very flexible in my own thinking about what do I think God is like? What do I even mean when I say God? That's a placeholder. That's just a word. That's a placeholder for a much bigger thing. And I'm very happy to be on a journey of trying to understand and trying to explore. And my money is on the creator of the multiverse understands that. And is not looking over me and saying, you unrepentant sinner, you're not listening to the literal word of God, and that explains all these things. The Bible is set up to not be looked at that way.
Right.
It's so diverse. It's contradictory in places, and in a good way contradictory, because you're really getting different points of view from different walks of life on the same issues. And that tells us, that alone tells us that it's okay. Not only is it okay, it's your sacred responsibility to think about these things, about what does it mean in your mind for God to show up here in this situation, right? And that's a huge theological discussion. It is, and that's fine with me.
It's huge. Well, I just appreciate that, because I've had to get rid of the shame and allow myself to say, hey, God would want me to think these thoughts and question these things and mesh all the truth that I know with everything I know up to this point, and try to continue to relate to a God, if that God exists. Right. I know God. Right. I think you ended your whole book about knowing God, right?
Yeah. What we even mean when we say God exists. What does it mean to say God exists? That's a more philosophical question, but I think it's a good one, because we get stuck on thinking of existence in very human and limiting terms. And that's why Panentheism is helpful to me, because it talks about existence differently than how, I might have been raised to think.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for your time, Pete. I'd love to pick this up again sometime with you, because I could go on forever, but curveball. I want to encourage everybody to read this. It's really well written. It's easy to read. You don't have to be a scholar to read this book. You can read it, and you do such a good job. Also, Pete has a podcast called The Bible for Normal People. And I have a lot of friends that have been listening to you for a long time, Pete, and they love the podcast. So thanks for the work that you've done there with Jared Baez and teaching it, and an author of several other books. So tell people, do you have a website? Is that the best way to?
Yeah, I mean, the BibleForNormalPeople.com is the best place, and the books are all there. And we have classes that we offer. When we offer them, they're pay what you can. I mean, literally, if $1 is all you have, then give $1, and then you can be a part of it. And other kinds of we're sort of an educational arm. That's how we see ourselves, and we have a lot of educational material there, including a blog and things like that.
So thank you so much for being on Spirituality Adventures. Thanks for everybody for tuning in to Spirituality Adventures, and see you next time. Thanks, Pete.
Thank you.
Hey, you made it to the end. Thanks for listening all the way through on this episode. By the way, if you're not already a supporter, go to spiritualityadventures.com, sign up for one of our monthly supports, and you will receive our bonus content. You'll receive lots of interesting information about our guests. Many of our musicians will do special bonus songs and record a song. So I want to encourage you to do that. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Be sure and subscribe. Be sure and share any of the episodes that you like. And be sure to make comments if you like them as well. This helps us get Spirituality Adventures out there to more listeners, more watchers. So whatever platform you're using, subscribe, like, share, make comments, and go to our website, sign up for our team, and be a part of the team support. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.